So the next item on the agenda is the 6 p.m. time certain, and we're going to hear a presentation about the HPS2 phosphate mine and any Alachua County concerns. And I just want to welcome some attorneys that we've hired. I want to welcome the court reporter for Hopping Green. So if anybody wants to get on the public record their concerns about it, there'll be somebody here recording it.
Mr. Chair, back in March of 2019, earlier this year, you entered into an agreement with De La Part and Gilbert, PA, a law firm, and as part of that agreement, there was a scope of services. The scope of services included the attorneys that you hired bringing on experts in the area of, and you'll hear from them today, hydrology and air and water and other natural resources. And in essence, what they're trying to do is evaluate the public record for the impacts of a potential phosphate mine in Bradford and Union County on Alachua County. You are not being asked to do anything today. This is purely an informational item. It is one of the tasks in the scope of services to create a report, and that's what you're getting today, on those potential impacts, and to share those reports with any of the regulatory agencies, local, state, and federal, who will listen to us in these cases. And we are, this is the report that is being shared with regulatory agencies. So I will, I emailed out to you the scope of services to remind you of what you were receiving, and I also emailed out to you the CVs from the experts that you're hearing from today. Mr. De La Part is the attorney that you hired, and he will be introducing those experts.
And would you recommend that we hold our questions or interrupt you all during the presentation?
The presentation is going to be mostly by the experts, and it's a very in-depth presentation. So my suggestion would be that you ask questions as they're working their way through the presentation, because otherwise, when we get to the end of the presentation, you'll forget what the information was at the beginning. We've tried to be very thorough in this presentation, and so we welcome some interactive questioning as we're going through the process. So as Ms. Torres mentioned, my name is Edward De La Part, Jr. I'm a partner with a law firm of De La Part and Gilbert in Tampa, Florida. I'm an environmental attorney who has practiced for over 42 years. I have represented local governments in Southwest Florida in the Peace River Basin with regards to phosphate mines in those areas over a period of about 10 years. So earlier this year, Alachua County retained our firm to provide technical and legal support with regards to the proposed HPS phosphate mine, which will be located along the Santa Fe River and the New River in Union and Bradford counties. The area where the mine is to be located is environmentally sensitive, as the Santa Fe River is an outstanding Florida water. Minimum flows in a basin management action plan have been adopted for this system, and portions of the system have been designated as critical habitat for endangered or threatened species. Now, since a phosphate mine involves a removal of overburden, that's their term for all of the superficial aquifer and sand and landscape out on the ground, to a depth of about 50 feet in order to extract the phosphate rock and then attempt to reclaim the land after the mining is completed, it can potentially have significant impacts to surface and groundwater, wetlands, listed species, and other natural resources. These impacts could impact the air, water, and other natural resources of Alachua County, as the Santa Fe River in particular is a major resource to Alachua County. Consequently, I was asked to assemble an expert team to gather information concerning the mine, prepare an analysis of the potential impacts of the mine on those natural resources, and today's presentation represents the expert team's initial results of this analysis. Now, there's still, you'll see a lot of unanswered questions because, quite frankly, some of the information submitted by HPS has been incomplete and does not address some of the issues that the experts have identified. In a few minutes, I'm going to turn over the microphone to the experts, and they're going to go through the presentation, and I will, as an attorney, will not be trying to interpret their language. But I did want to save some time by just introducing each of the experts before they get up here, give you a little bit about their background. We have CVs that are much longer, which we could provide the board if they wish to, but just wanted to give you an idea of who the people are that will be talking to you today. The first person you'll hear from is Patrick Terra, who's a senior water resources engineer with a consulting firm in Terra Incorporated. Mr. Terra has over 28 years of experience in water resource engineering focused on surface water hydrology, groundwater hydraulics, and integrated surface water and groundwater hydrologic systems. He has considerable experience with hydrologic data and analysis and the development and application of hydrologic, hydraulic, water quality, and salinity models. Mr. Terra also has substantial experience with minimum flows and levels, including ones established by the Suwannee River Water Management District for the Santa Fe River. Finally, Mr. Terra also has experience studying the hydrologic impacts of phosphate mining and reclamation, mostly in the central portion of the state. The next person you'll hear from is Dr. Sam Upchurch. Dr. Upchurch is a professional geologist and the former chairman of the Board of Professional Geologists. Until recently, Dr. Upchurch was the senior principal geologist for SD2 Global Corporation. Prior to working as a consultant, Dr. Upchurch was a university professor at Michigan State University and at the University of South Florida, where for a time he was the chair of the Department of Geology at the University of South Florida. Dr. Upchurch has over 50 years of experience with karst hydrology and geomorphology, hydrology, ground and surface water geochemistry, sinkholes, springs, and many other subject areas that are far too long for me to list here today. Dr. Upchurch also was involved in the establishment of minimum flows and levels for the Santa Fe River and is very familiar with that system, and he also has experience with phosphate mining. And the next person you hear from is Dr. Anthony Janicki, who is the president and founder of Janicki Environmental. He is an expert in the fields of aquatic ecology, watershed management, water quality modeling, and assessments, limnology, and biological assessments. Dr. Janicki has been heavily involved in Florida's Impaired Waters Program, minimum flows and levels, and basin management action plans. Like the other two experts, Dr. Janicki was involved in developing minimum flows and levels for the Santa Fe River and has considerable experience with phosphate mines. The final member of the team is Dr. Thomas Chrisman. Dr. Chrisman is currently the Jefferson Science Fellow and Professor in the School of Geoscience at the University of South Florida. Prior to joining the faculty of the University of South Florida, Dr. Chrisman was a longtime professor in the Department of Environmental Engineering Sciences at the University of Florida, where he served as the director of the Howard T. Odom Center for Wetlands from 1995 to 2007. Dr. Chrisman is an expert in ecology, zoology, and limnology. Dr. Chrisman has lectured and published extensively. However, most notably, he has co-authored a number of publications investigating the reclamation of wetlands and streams by the phosphate industry over the past 20 years. So Dr. Chrisman is very familiar with their success and failures in that regard. So unless you have any questions of me, I am going to turn this over first to Mr. Terra.
I've got a real short one.
Sure.
Just for people who may not know, where is this in process and what? Just explain real briefly how somebody gets approval.
Okay. This mine is going to require federal and state and local permits. The local permitting would need to be done by Union County and Bradford County. My understanding is Union County has declared a moratorium, and they're in litigation right now with HPS over the permitting of the mine. Bradford County has a mining plan and special permit application that's been filed, and my understanding is that they're nearing completion of that review process and will be going to a public hearing, I would guess, sometime in the next few months. At the state level, they're going to need an environmental resource permit and an NPDES permit. NPDES permit is a federal clean water program that allows for the discharge of wastewater into the waters of the state. Both are administered by the Department of Environmental Protection. There have been numerous discussions with the department regarding the environmental resource permit. Materials have been submitted back and forth between the agency and the applicant, but the applicant had not formally applied, to our knowledge, for an environmental resource permit from the Department of Environmental Protection at this time. At the federal level, they're going to need an Army Corps of Engineers, what they call Section 404 or dredge and fill permit for this particular mine. And to our knowledge, they have not submitted that application yet. They're going to need all those permits, as well as some others that are not as significant as those, in order for them to be able to begin operating this particular mine.
Thank you.
Any other questions that you might have? Then, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Terra, and he's going to lead you into certain sections of our analysis.
Thank you. So just a brief outline. I'm a surface water, groundwater specialist, professional engineer in the state of Florida. So I'll be covering the groundwater, surface water issues. Mine reclamation issues, we definitely have some concerns in that area. Hydrogeologic concerns, minimum flows and levels, nutrient, and wetland. So surface water, we definitely would like to see a mine-wide water budget. It's pre-mining, active mining, post-reclamation. They had submitted some simulations, some models. One of the models they had was event-based only. That's not sufficient to be able to do the analysis to evaluate whether the MFL is impacted. The MFL is a minimum flow, which is seasonally, and it's not depicting any storm events, like significant storm events that they had modeled. Their event-based modeling covered the 25-year, 24-hour storm event and the 100-year. Again, those are very much a flood condition and not evaluating the minimum flow, which is the component of concern.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Sure.
Everything you're talking about is for both counties, the
Yes.
entire, okay, so it's not one county or the other?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
It's covering the entire mine site. They did develop some continuous models, but they weren't of the whole entire mine. And as I said before, it's important for us to evaluate the water balance of the entire mine and how it's going to impact the system. The consumptive use, the mine is obviously going to be consuming water. Part of the processing of phosphatic ore, you need to have water. So there is going to be a consumptive use permit required, and we would like to evaluate those impacts on how much it's going to be impacting the hydrologic system. And another thing of critical concern is the reclamation methodology. It's very much a new method. It hasn't been proven except on very small scale test sites. And so we're very concerned about how that sand clay mix and the handling of that sand clay mix will impact the hydrology.
Sorry, what does AET stand for?
Sorry?
AET, if we could spell
Actual,
out as many acronyms
yeah,
as we
sorry,
can tonight.
that's typical engineering. We like our acronyms. AET is actual actual evapotranspiration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. ET is a significant component of the water balance. In Florida, we've got rainfall is our most significant. That's where all our water comes from. And then our evaporation rates are the second largest water budget term. So it's critical that we evaluate that, because whatever you do on the land surface is going to change ET. And I'll get into that later with some of the land use changes that they're proposing. And that is going to have an impact on the water balance, how much water is leaving the site, how much water will be trapped on the site. So So here is some pre and post mine reclamation. It is a mine-wide model that they developed, but I'm pointing out here that it's based on in a model called HydroCAD, and HydroCAD is event-based only. So they simulated, like I said, the 25-year, 24-hour event, very much a flood condition. That's what we design drainage for roads to make sure roads don't get impacted. But again, this is, we want to evaluate minimum flows and levels, so we're worried about the entire hydrologic cycle throughout all the seasons, the wet season, the dry season. So you need to have a continuous model to be able to evaluate that. Event-based models ignore ET altogether because they're simulating 7 days. So ET is this long process that affects the annual water budget. A 7-day simulation, you pretty much can ignore, and that's typically what's done in engineering. You just ignore ET altogether. So that's an important component is to get that continuous modeling. They did apply or they did submit additional information, and I'm pointing out here that this is a request for additional information, attachment 6. They evaluated the pre and post mine conditions for stage discharge relationships. They showed there was no impacts, but it was a very simplistic, it's a Manning-Zen simulation. So it was just using a simple engineering equation, and really the mine, they're by statute, they're required to stay away from the river valley itself, all the wetlands. They don't want to impact wetlands directly surrounding the riparian wetlands around the river. So it was kind of, it's kind of a no-brainer that the stage discharge relationship is not impacted. But what we should be looking at is the water balance, how much rain is leaving the site through runoff, through base flow. And this information here, as far as attachment 6, did not address any of those. So here's some of the stage relationships, and I'll point out, a model in engineering terms, you want to be able to show that your model predicts something that was measured. And you can see this first graph, the red and green dots. I don't want to go into details with it, but we have a good agreement here. But because their analysis was just at a point, they couldn't take into effect things like, the pool and riffle shoals that occur on the river. And that's exactly what's happening on the second graph here, where they showed an observed event and a calibration event, and they're nowhere near, matching. So it doesn't address the impacts due to changes in land use, which I'm going to evaluate or show you next. They did develop a mine-wide water balance, but it evaluated more for the movement of water through the mine, the process water, and it didn't take into account the changes in land use, and that's I keep going back to that, but that's a very important factor. Which I'll show in some of these maps. The water balance analysis, it didn't have enough detail as far as being able to reproduce it. They kind of threw out these numbers and tables in this component of what they submitted, and it really lacks a lot of technical detail that is necessary for us to evaluate. They did perform some ICPR4 modeling. It's a model. It's a very popular model. It is a continuous model. It incorporates groundwater and surface water. But as you can see in the map, you were asking about the mine. The outline here is the entire mine site, both Bradford and Union counties. But their ICPR modeling is just in this yellow area. So it's a very small component of the mine. And again, it's not adequate to evaluate all the impacts that would be present at the New River and at the Santa Fe River.
Why would they not map the entire mine?
I don't know. I keep going back to it, but it's a very important facet of the analysis is to look at all the impacts. And they developed this ICPR4 modeling of just a small domain. They developed a mod flow model, again, just a groundwater model of the same domain. They did look at this model just to look at wetland impacts around the mine. At least this area. I don't know. There's really no explanation why they didn't cover it, the entire mine site. And this ICPR4 modeling that they did, they were really just looking at the groundwater calibration and missing the evaluation of all the surface water impacts that would be present. So here's the ICPR4 modeling results. To some degree, they have a fit to observe data. This is just groundwater data that they were looking at. It's missing all the surface water impacts. They should have evaluated surface water discharges or rainfall runoff, but they did not use that for this model. This is what they were focusing in, was the hydro period of these wetlands that they were mining around. Obviously, that's a concern for the state, and they wanted to protect the hydro period of the wetlands because that's the maintaining the health. But again, they should have had this model calibrated to surface water and covering the entire mine site. And this is just kind of recapping some of the things I had mentioned. It's not mine-wide. There was no surface water model calibration, post-reclamation parameterization, not founded with observed clay properties, because, again, that's getting to some of, I'll get into more details with, but it's a new process that they're going to be using on this mine.
Mike?
So you're sort of pointing out what you consider to be deficiencies or inadequacies in what the applicant is doing so far. Are there standards that have to be followed? Is it just you as an expert versus their expert stating what needs to be done, or will the state, federal, and local entities require one or the other? Are they going to say, you're right, you have to do more work? How does that play out?
It's my understanding they are requesting additional information, and they had submitted.
They who are?
They, the mine, the HSP, had submitted additional or answers to some of those requests, but I don't think they have sufficiently, evaluated all the impacts. The state, so just like Ed had mentioned, we have different agencies that they'll have to get permits from. The DEP obviously is involved. The Swanee River Water Management District will get involved as a component of the MFL. The MFL, the minimum flow and level on the Swanee River, they will have to prove that whatever they do on this mine to the district, whether the district approves it or not is up to them, but they will have to prove that they will not be impacting the MFL.
So you will stand up on our behalf and say you should have done this kind of analysis, and they will say, no, we believe this is adequate. And the Water Management District and the federal authorities at each stage of the process will decide which of you they agree with, but they don't necessarily pre-publish the type of tests that have to be done in a scenario like this.
Right, yeah, there's no prescribed methodology. There's a standard of engineering practice that they must follow, but there's no cookbook, this is what you need to do. The pre and post land cover, these tables, Table 9 and Table 10, show the changes in the land use. So what item I want to point out that's most significant is lakes. So the lakes land use right now, you can see in the, this is two tables, one for Bradford County, one for Union County. So in Bradford County, there is actually 0 acres pre-mining for open water lakes. But post-reclamation, you can see there's 527 acres. That's almost a square mile of lake area. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is open water and lake have a significantly different actual ET because it's open water. Water is always available. The climate has a demand, potential ET that it wants to be satisfied, and the lakes can basically have a lot of evaporation as part of their water balance, leaving the watershed, leaving the basin.
And these lakes are just basically holes where they dug up the stuff and they're not filling it back in.
Yes, so,
All right. So they're
as
deep.
part of the phosphate mining, they're removing a lot of material and exporting it as phosphate.
And not filling it back in, they're leaving
And they
lakes.
don't have enough material to fill it back in, and you're left with a lot of depressions.
So these will be fairly deep holes, like quarries.
Probably.
Like, okay.
Yep.
All right.
So
And
there's
it's
a lot
also
of,
because they're making, the clay now is less able to perk. Is that part of what happens also?
yes, we have some slides on that. I can
Okay.
I can get
Ken.
into some of that.
So what you just said, I just want to understand in plain County Commissioner English. So when you say larger water body, more evaporation, does that mean that other areas like wetlands would then not be evaporated, or like I don't understand. I didn't understand what you said. When you
Yeah,
said
so every
eva-
land use has evaporation.
Right.
So, if you have pasture grass, it has a much lower evaporation rate, actual evapotranspiration leaving that land use, just because the root zone, the roots of the vegetation is very shallow. There's usually, there's a lot of the vegetation cover on the surface is it's grass on pasture, so it doesn't have a lot of capture going on. So pasture actual ET rates is fairly small, 20 some inches a year.
Okay.
Engineers, we pretty much handle the quantity of water as kind of inches over the area,
Okay.
just to make it normalized. Lakes, on the other hand, they're free to satisfy potential, how much water wants to go into the climate. So actual ET rates off of, say, lakes can be in the 50s, okay?
Okay.
So it's a dramatic shift from pasture that used to be 20 inches of loss to the atmosphere, and now we dig a hole and there's a big lake, and now it's losing water to the atmosphere at about 50 inches. So there's a 30-inch deficit that really you can't make up because you can't generate more water. We're only given so much rainfall. So just by the fact that they're generating these large lakes, a square mile in Bradford and over a square mile in Union, that's going to generate a lot of actual ET and therefore a lot less water leaving the site.
Which is bad because the water then is not available for wetlands and ground recharge in the area. That's
Right.
the final step.
And satisfying the MFL downriver to the upper Santa Fe.
Thank you.
Yep. So it's that shift in land use that's going to have the change in the ET. So they did present a pre-mining land cover, and you'll see the post-mining, all these blue areas, these blue polygons, is their proposed lakes. They have to construct them just for the sheer fact that they're exporting a lot of material, and the water table will basically fill up these areas, these depressions. Groundwater, just like in the surface water impacts, we want to see a mine-wide groundwater model. They should have appropriate boundary conditions, just like any model. We would like to evaluate any impacts during active mining as well as post-reclamation. Any proposed consumptive use. They're obviously, an active mine. They're going to be consuming water on site, and how those consumptions impact groundwater levels. The hydraulic properties I had briefly mentioned that they have this new technology. It's a sand-clay mix. Most of the phosphate mining in Florida, when they do the beneficiation of the ore, they have two waste streams. One is clean sand, which can be exported as well as building sand. But they also have another waste stream, which is clay. And that's where you might have heard the term CSAs, clay settling areas. Clay is very difficult to deal with because it's a material that you can't build on. You know, even farming on top of it's difficult. Clay takes a very long time for it to settle and consolidate, even to the point where you can walk on it. So it's a complex problem that most of the phosphate mining in Florida have to deal with. This mine in particular, they have this new technology, and they've been working on it for a very long time, where they try to mix the sand and the clay together and deposit it back into the mine pit, and you have this new media that is structurally strong, so you don't have this clay, clay as a solid element. It's a sand clay mix, which is easier to work with. The problem is well, they've been working on this technology for a very long time and have been unsuccessful at it. So I'm immediately concerned about what they are proposing because it hasn't been tested on a large scale, and unproven technology is obviously prone to failure or having to have some workarounds. The hydraulic properties of this sand clay mix have not been adequately tested, and therefore there's a lot of questions as far as how to evaluate those impacts, in pre-post impacts. There's models, very large scale regional models I mentioned here on the slide. The NEFSEG, the North Florida, Southeast Georgia. It's a regional model that could be used to help with boundary conditions, but I would like to see a sub-regional model mine-wide so that they could prove that their activities are not impacting adversely the water supply and the water leaving the site. So the groundwater model, ModFlow was used to demonstrate drawdown for dewatering only. They did not evaluate the water balance. This is just some information from their report, but basically that the model demonstrated just the dewatering activities could be managed. There's engineering activities that you can do to prevent seepage losses from these sites and impacts outside of the mine, because the mine has to be dewatered to extract the ore. But this model was used to evaluate that. It did not look at the water balance, and that's, again, an important facet of evaluating these impacts. Linked surface groundwater models, that's a technology that's been around for a while. The New River contributes 40% of the flow to the Santa Fe, and that's a fairly significant component to the upper Santa Fe MFL. So without the New River, or any impacts to the New River, are going to be a direct impact to the upper Santa Fe MFL. Continuous modeling is going to be required, and those continuous modeling should evaluate both impacts of surface water and groundwater. And so it needs to evaluate some kind of integration between the surface water system and the groundwater. Field data, they collected some well data on their site, but they do not have stream flow. The USGS has a continuous stream flow gauge on the New River that's just upstream of the site. I would like to see would need to evaluate a stream flow gauge downstream, so you could look at any kind of changes potentially on the site. And those should be monitored throughout mining, and as well as after mine reclamation. They have water levels. They had 5 locations for water levels, but again, as far as evaluating those impacts, they need to continue that data collection. And I would like to see aquifer performance testing of the current condition as it is now, but also some tests done on locally of the sand clay mix. Domestic wells, again, this is the water management district will need to evaluating the impacts, but there's a lot of domestic wells around the mine site, and you know, any kind of impacts at the groundwater to the groundwater from the mine activities, we would need to make sure that you know, the surrounding area is not impacted.
What is that, maybe 50 wells and we're looking at here?
I do not have the count,
Okay.
but they are private domestic self-supply wells. But not only should we be worried about water quantity, but water quality. So I mean, they're mining into our aquifer, and the polymer that's used for the dewatering of the clays, we should be concerned if that's going to transport any kind of transports of any of the beneficiation chemicals that they use. Those would all have to be evaluated. The mine reclamation concerns, like I had mentioned, they're using a new technology of mixing the sand and the clay together. There was a pilot study, but it used clays from the central mining district near Bartow, and the pilot study was very small scaled. It was not enough to convince that the processing of the sand clay mix over a large scale could actually work. Nor was the sand clay mix tested after the fact. Once it was deposited in the pit, we should have had tests done on the infiltration capacity of the soils, the conductivity of that sand clay mix. They're obviously going to be different from what is there now, and that's part of the evaluation process is evaluating the impacts from what it is existing today and this new post-reclamation material. The composition of the clays, it was very limited test study. They actually rehydrated dried clays, and so that's you know, this test should almost be redone. They actually recommended it to one of the conclusions was to redo the test using newly mined materials and dewatered materials. The material should be local as well. You know, there's a lot of difference between the material to the north and to the south, so it should be using you know, the northern mine district clays, just to make sure and assure ourselves that there are not going to be any impacts from this new reclamation. So here's some of the recommendations. This is where they recommended additional testing, and this is from their report. The pilot plant was only done in 2017, and again, it was very small scale. So additional testing, you know, we would like to see evaluation of the infiltration rates. That's water moving from the surface down into the aquifer, as well as horizontal and vertical conductivity. Once you're in the media, in a saturated case, we would need to evaluate the conductivities. I had mentioned this before, but the migration of the clays after placement. You know, when you're filling the mine pit with the sand clay mix, it's going to be open to the atmosphere. It's going to have precipitation and rain. So all those clays, Mother Nature is going to want to separate again. So when it's an open pit and actively filling it, the newly placed material will start to migrate and move around and form lenses. And that's why we'd like to see some larger scale tests of this untested methodology. And then the fate and transport of the polymer, if that polymer starts to migrate that would actually be some impacts that we would like to avoid. The conveyor transport, typically the phosphate mining, all the transport of material is done in a liquid form. So it's a slurry, and they pump it in pipes, and so everything is contained. This proposed reclamation. They're using they're transporting it as a dry media. They're dry material, so they dewater the clays and they mix it with the sands, and they transport it not as a slurry in these pipes, but as a conveyor belts. And these conveyors are transferring the material over miles. It's been done a lot out west. Some of the mines in the west, in Australia, they use conveyors for many miles. But here in Florida, we have a very complex environment that is very erosive and corrosive to equipment. And so that's something of concern, is what's the longevity of conveyor transport of this media. There's losses. They propose that the conveyor is going to be completely enclosed as it crosses the river, because you certainly wouldn't want to spill any of this media into the river, because that would be a direct impact. But concerns for how this method of transport in this unproven mine reclamation is, because if it does fail, what would their plan be? I would hate for them to go back to what is traditionally done here in Florida is a liquid clay settling areas, because that would be have a lot of impacts, both in hydrology as well as other water quality and wetlands.
So the full enclosure is only when it's crossing water bodies?
It's only crossing the river. Yep.
Excuse me, is it through the water or under the river?
It's over.
Over.
So it's
Over
basically a bridge. This is a map of the proposed bridge, or the crossing. It's right next to the County Road 231. So it's over the river, but it's going to have hydraulic impacts, because there's going to be another set of piles. The direction, axis of flow, it's kind of in a bad location, because it's changing directions, and that causes additional erosion in the channel and additional impacts. Another issue is debris accumulation. You're going to have more piles in the water, and in a rural setting that's on the New River, any debris can get caught on those piles and cause like a natural or a dam of sorts. So here's a map of their proposed conveyor crossings and their conveyor belt that's going to transfer the media. And with that, I will turn it over to Sam.
Good evening. Before I start through the slides, as a hydrogeologist, I'm the springs and sinkholes and aquifers guy, and the work that was submitted by the applicant is really deficient. It's just badly deficient. And so you'll see as I go through here that there are many things that we need to know that just simply have not been addressed at all. And there are industry standards. There are no written standards for most of these things, because every site's different and so on. But there are industry standards, and this just simply does not come up to industry standards. So let's start with springs. I know that's a concern of the board here, and I just wanted to say a little bit. Excuse me, the presentation in their report of the springs, basically they're saying we don't have any impact. And one of the reasons that they're saying that is because I think they are mining in the wrong aquifer. They think they're mining in the superficial aquifer, and they're really mining in the intermediate aquifer. So the springs, it may be that they haven't treated them with the thoroughness that I would like to see, primarily because of that mistake. But
I'm sorry. But now those two are defined, correct?
oh yes,
They're okay. It's not
yes,
a matter
yeah. In
of
fact,
opinion.
I'm one of the authors of the paper that defined them. So anytime you start messing around with springs, you all know this, that you affect the river's flows, you affect the MFLs, you affect the value of the spring as a recreational or water source or whatever. And that's certainly the possibility here, where in the upper Santa Fe, there's a second magnitude spring just above Olino State Park, above the river sink. And it's very likely discharging river water, water from the New River. They ignored impacts on the upper Floridan aquifer. In fact, they don't even have a well or boring that goes all the way to the upper Floridan. So we don't know how deep it is at the site. We don't know what the conditions of the confining beds above it are at the site at all. But of course, these sites, the springs, are largely Floridan aquifer springs, and depending on how leaky the confining bed is, the mining at the top of the intermediate aquifer or even in the superficial aquifer very likely can cause interruptions or disturbances or shortages in flow. So that's the main concern that I have about springs. I did most of the spring shed delineation work for the county back, about 10 years ago now. And this map is partly based on my spring shed delineations. I'm not saying they're necessarily right. They're the best I could do. But they've extended them on up into the area where the mine is. And you can see the mine is that red pattern here in the map. And that little protuberance of yellow looks like a carrot sticking up there. That's between Lusty Creek and New River. And that's not right, I don't think. So the spring shed delineation is not necessarily very good. But more important than that is, what if they do mess up, change the recharge to the Floridan aquifer? This is a figure that shows the red is the mine outline, and you can see the location of Brooker there, which is just right cheek to jowl with the mine at its southernmost extent. And the mine straddles the New River. But those black lines with 70, 60, 50, 40, that's the 2014 fall, at the end of the rainy season, water levels in the Floridan aquifer, the potentiometric surface. And if you look at the water, always flows downhill. So water from the mine, if the mine affects the Floridan, water from the mine is crossing at right angles to those black lines. So it would go past Worthington Springs, past the 40 on that map, and turn into Hornsby Springs, Treehouse Springs, or River Rise. And the Old Bellamy Cave is a big supply of water for the River Rise. And that cave extends primarily to the east, right into where this flow system would be. So if they affect the Floridan aquifer, there's a really high probability they will affect springs in your county. And certainly they will affect the MFL if the impact is anything at all. The map on the left there is the map I provided to the county many years ago. And it shows the same thing, that you'll see the, up there, there's a thing that says Santa Fe Rise Springs. That's the spring shed for River Rise, basically. And you can see I left it open at the top. The red lines are my boundaries, because we didn't have any good data up there. And we still don't. The mine should be developing that data so that they can show that they are not going to impact the springs and the MFL. As far as as I say, there is an industry standard for hydrogeological characterization of a phosphate mine or anything really of this consequence. And the one that's provided here ignores most of the previous work on the area. There's been a lot of work, both because of the development of the MFL and because of work that the Water Management District and the U.S. Geological Survey have done in the area. All that's ignored. The regional effects of the mine are ignored. We don't know what the effects on karst, sinkholes particularly, would be, what the effects on the intermediate and upper Florida aquifer would be, and they assume that the mine will only affect the superficial aquifer. And you'll see, I think in a minute, you'll see that I think they've erred in concluding that it's just a superficial. So they've erred in identifying the top of the intermediate aquifer. The matrix that they're going to mine is, I think, below the top of the intermediate aquifer. It's in the aquifer. That's where most of the wells, domestic wells, in Broker, for instance, are located, or in the intermediate aquifer, and that's from the U.S. Geological Survey. So they may have blown the whole framework that they're using to describe their impacts that way. Finally, what little data we do have are boring logs for some monitoring wells. Their descriptions are terrible, so we really don't know, in many cases, what they're mining through. So the mine argues that they're mining from the superficial aquifer. And like I say, I was part of the group that defined these aquifers back in the 80s. And there's a mine-wide clay bed that's about 10 to 15 feet below land surface, and the phosphate ore is below that. That, to me, is the top of the intermediate aquifer, the top of what we call the Hawthorne group. And 87% of the monitoring well logs, that's the only data, subsurface data we have, report the clay. They report the clay and report the matrix, the material they're going to mine, is 12 to 40 feet below land surface. So that puts it below the clay. And I can tell you that I've mapped geology in this area for years, decades, and I would put it in the intermediate aquifer, which means it's cheek to jowl with those domestic wells at Brooker. It means that it's the primary source of water to the New River and to the upper Santa Fe until you get down to about the River Rise area. The springs, the big springs, start popping up. There's in the intermediate, there's a limestone to carbonate marley layer at the top that's called the Charlton member of the Coosawhatchee Formation. And that's what they seem to be mining. And if it's a limestone in that area, it's karst. So, again, they've missed all of this. That's where the mine is. Okay, as far as aquifer and water use, they really do need to provide a census of wells not just within the mine footprint, but as far out as the mine's going to have any impact, which means as far out as the model that Mr. Terra is talking about extends and shows impact into it. So it's miles, perhaps, beyond the boundaries of the mine. And that would include perhaps Lake Butler, certainly other farms and areas in proximity of the mine. So that inventory is desperately needed. And they need to know, how deep those wells are and what formations those wells are in and what aquifers and so on.
Yeah, Mike, hang on.
Just backing up one slide.
Yes, sir.
This Charlton or Carlton formation you're talking about is a source of water to Worthington Springs, the town of Worthington Springs. That isn't.
I think it may be. I'm pretty confident that it was a source of water for the springs at Worthington Springs, which have been dry for years. Okay. So it may be that the water levels have been pulled down below the level of the Charlton.
Well, Worthington Springs, is that an incorporated town?
It is. I think it is.
And so they have a town council. Does anyone know if they have weighed in on this issue that would affect their water supply, potentially?
I
They have a
no-
town clerk and then a,
You have any idea?
I'm not sure, yeah.
I can just say that they have passed resolutions of concern about the mining.
Well, I'm glad they're concerned. All right, thank you.
and they should, I think. Good. Well, you know, Brooker and Lake Butler and Worthington Springs and those communities, whether they're organized into some sort of civil unit or not, they need to be have a say in what's happening here, because there's a high probability, I think, that they'll be impacted. Okay. Pat talked about the uncertainty regarding that reclamation method. And as a geologist, you know, the clay minerals in Polk County are different from the clay minerals up here. Not entirely, but there are differences. And so taking Polk County material and concluding that it will work in Union or Bradford County is maybe a stretch. One thing that they, I'll leave it there for the moment. One thing that the mine applicants did was they hired an engineering firm to do a pilot test on the materials from their mine. And they have one sample from Union County, one sample from Bradford County. And they split the sample and did duplicates of the sample. But they screened it with a screen. And that's not the same size fractions that come out of the beneficiation plant. So that pilot study, I think, is problematic, to say the least. As far as the Karst goes, that figure on the left there is a cross section of what's known as the Cody Scarp. You're right in the middle of the Cody Scarp here. The bottom of it is out at Hogtown Prairie, and the top end of it is back over by the airport. You're right in the middle of it. That's why it's so hilly here and so beautiful. And it's a karst feature. And back in 2002, when I did that diagram, I divided it into 3 areas, and that area that's under the arrow is the actual location of the scarp. And you can see the hills there, and that's you know, Gainesville just beautifully. So they prepared.
Who was Cody who got the scarp named after him?
I'm sorry?
Who was Cody who got the scarp?
Cody's a little town up in Jefferson County.
Okay.
I mean, you sneeze and you miss it. It's that small. But the scarp is really beautifully displayed there. So it's named after the town.
Okay, yeah, I've always wondered that. Thank you.
The map that is on the right there shows the mine location. This is from their ERP. The black line is basically a line that the Water Management District developed that shows roughly the toe of the scarp, according to their thinking. The 2 yellow lines are the top and the bottom of the scarp that I drew many years ago. And you can see that they clearly put the mine in the Cody Scarp. And they put it at a location that on that figure on the left-hand side is where the arrow is. So the big, deep sinkholes and features that create the pretty hills down here, they're further on off to the west. It's right at the top where sinkholes and subterranean drainage is beginning to happen. And there they are right there in the middle of it. So they showed it, but then they didn't address. Whoops.
Can you go back?
Yeah,
Mr.
of
Chair?
course.
So, so where we are is where the arrow is. Where,
No. You're basically in the middle of somewhere around. Well, think of the low spot with the water in it there. Will it point?
Middle of
Oh, it does. You're out in here somewhere. That could be, Kanapaha or Hogtown Prairie or whatever, and Hogtown Creek would be coming back up this slope. And this is back actually right where the airport is, roughly now. Okay? So I went and looked at the topography of the area. And again, the mine is shown in red there. And all those little brown features are depressions in the land surface, almost certainly all sinkholes and so on. And there are some in the mine. If I can point with this thing, those features right there are. This thing is a major collapse zone, very much like the Devil's Mill Hopper. It's called Brooks Sink.
Northeast of Brooker.
It's due west of Brooker, about 4 miles, 5 miles, something like that. But it's a collapse. So they're in that zone where the Cody is beginning to develop and sinkholes are beginning to develop. And one of their monitoring well logs, actually said we hit a cavern. But then they blew off the Karst. They basically didn't say anything about it. There are those sinkholes there, and the Brooks Sink is right here. And the Water Management District and the property owners have invested a fair amount of money in working on that to try to use it to enhance recharge, the Brooks Sink. So they're going to mine through this area. This is the area Patrick pointed out that they were modeling and so on, and here are these features in here. If I'm right, and they're mining in the intermediate, the sinkholes are either in the intermediate or they're in the upper Floridan aquifer. And so those could be pipelines going straight down. They also did a sinkhole inventory to basically say there's no problem with sinkholes. They went to a state geological, the Florida Geological Survey subsidence incidence database, which is basically a list of sinkholes and other types of depressions that people can call in or send in a form. They show up in the newspapers and so on. It's not a bad database in some respects, but it's certainly not comprehensive. And again, Alachua County has had its fair share of sinkholes, and you can see there's only one that shows up in the county on that database. So it's not an adequate way of saying that sinkhole risk is not a problem. This is Brooks Sink, and it's got more water in it than Devil's Mill Hopper does, but it's a major collapse sinkhole. And it's like I say, the Rayner and the district have put a lot of money into enhancing recharge to the Floridan through that. And here it is in a geological setting, very similar to the mine.
Excuse me, is that a natural feat?
It's a natural
feature?
sink, yes, ma'am.
Oh, my.
It certainly is.
We don't have that slide, right?
Oh,
Just
we
like
don't
the
have
Devil's Mill Hopper is.
My.
Yeah. Again, at the very top of this thing that they call the Cody Escarpment, you don't get a lot of little sinkholes necessarily. When you get one, it's a whopper.
Gotcha.
I hope you don't get one. Okay, just a little bit more about minimum levels and flows. The district is producing a new minimum level and flow document for the lower Santa Fe. The lower Santa Fe is the river rise down to the Suwannee. And there is an existing MFL that's been adopted by the district board for the upper Santa Fe, which is everything from river sink upstream, which includes New River. At present, they're adding another monitoring point in the lower Santa Fe, I hear, at the 441 bridge near High Springs. But right now, the MFL, the intermediate MFL, the temporary one, is at Fort White gauge, way on down near the Ishtutney. And at Worthington Springs in the upper Santa Fe, at median flow there at the gauge, we said there was about 20 cubic feet of water per second available. However, when you get down to the 25th percentile, in other words, 25% of the time, there's 0 water available. So you can imagine that Worthington Springs gauge is downstream from New River. So if they start lowering flow in New River, they're going to drive that down, and they're going to have less and less and less available water for other uses. At Fort White, right now, the Ishtuckney River is in recovery. Fort White's and the lower Santa Fe is in recovery. We'll find out shortly, hopefully, as to what they finally come up with, and all that may change. But there are MFLs, and whether there's a little bit of available water or no available water, and recovery is mandated, there ain't much. So again, water discharging from the river rise could be coming in from the Florida and through the old Bellamy Cave system and directly from the mine, or it could be surface water that goes under at the river sink, which is, again, New River plus lower Santa Fe, upper Santa Fe water. So that impact could be realized there.
I've got a quick question.
Yes, sir.
So at the confluence of the New and the Santa Fe River, you've been to that spot, right?
I have.
The New River seems like the larger of the two tributaries. So why is the New River not just the upper Santa Fe River? I mean, somebody decided at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the name tells you right there.
Yeah.
Whoever the first people in here said, "Oh, well, there's the Santa. Oh my gosh, there's a New River," and so you're absolutely right that particularly at low flow. Something like 40-50% of the water
headwaters of the
Worthington
Santa Fe there,
Springs is New River.
it's just a tiny little stream, and the New River is a real river.
Exactly.
Okay, because it always sort of, I didn't know if there was something about water characteristics or anything like that.
No, I think it's just history.
Okay.
Like I say, the fact that they called it New River tells me that they didn't realize it was there when they were naming
Right.
things.
Yeah, so I think it's wrong to think about the New River as separate from the Santa Fe. The New River is the Santa Fe River for all practical purposes.
Basically, it is.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. So anyway, one of the shortcomings of the ERP is that they don't even mention MFLs. And here we've got a system that, I mean, you all are dealing with the public that are very sensitive to the availability of water in the Santa Fe and its springs. And they may have an impact on that, and yet they don't address it at all. So that's a serious shortcoming. I guess at this point, Tony, I'm going to transition to Dr. Janicki, and he's a lot more up on the machinations of the politics and so on.
Before you get started,
Oh,
do you
yes,
need a break? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, and good evening. I've had the pleasure of working with Patrick and Sam over many, many projects over many, many years. And what they've been able to show you tonight is how important getting the water right is. And, I think it's pretty safe to say that, the applicant just hasn't gotten there yet in getting that water right. So in not getting the water right, it makes it very difficult for the applicant to show that they can be in compliance with the minimum flows and levels program, but also a program involving water quality. But let me talk about minimum flows and levels first. We use that acronym time and time again in very specific terms. The minimum flow or level, the flow for a river, a level in a lake, for example, or a spring, is the flow or level beyond which further withdrawals cause significant harm. So it really is a water supply issue, and it's a water use issue. And as Sam pointed out, is that in fact the three of us have worked on each of these MFLs that have been established by either the Swanee River Water Management District or the Department of Environmental Protection. So again, I think the real take-home message for what you've seen so far is you got to get the water right, and they have yet to do that. So in a situation where you are in recovery, in other words, the existing flows or levels are not meeting those standards as established, the the agencies are required to implement a recovery plan. The recovery plan protects existing legal users, but it also is responsible for identifying the projects and actions that can be taken to raise that river flow or that lake level to the appropriate level. So there are recovery plans in place that DEP and the Suwannee District have been working on. And again, as Sam just pointed out, one of the things when we're reading all these materials is that there's no mention of an MFL. So very difficult to show to the permitting agencies that you're going to be in compliance with something like an MFL if you don't even address it. So again, that was a big surprise, I think, for all of us. So, I mean, there's a variety of things in terms of that take-home message, but I think importantly,
Could I interrupt?
yes, sure.
Is the reason that they aren't bothering with the MFL information is they know that the regulatory bodies just routinely ignore impacts on MFLs, and it's not going to be a showstopper, since it never has been before? They've allowed every single permit to come in?
That is, I don't think it's a fair blanket statement. I do a lot of water use permitting involving minimum flows and levels, and it does depend upon the agency in some respects. I think that in this area in particular, that, at least the work that I've done with the Suwannee District, is they've become more and more aware of the importance of maintaining those levels. While in the past that may have been a problem, perhaps not.
I promised I wasn't going to get up, but I had to get up to answer your question on that particular one. The Environmental Resource Program has as one of its criteria that if you're obtaining an environmental resource permit, you cannot cause a violation of a minimum flow or level. The problem that has occurred in the past with the mines is that in most cases the ERP program is administered by the water management districts, who are the ones that establish minimum flows and levels, and they are more familiar with those minimum flows and levels, and probably, I wouldn't say do a better job, but they're more cognizant of that when they're reviewing environmental resource permits. But phosphate mines and mines in general are not permitted by the water management districts, the environmental resource permits. They're permitted by the Department of Environmental Protection. And until just recently, with respect to the lower Santa Fe River, the department has never set an MFL. And the permit reviewers at the department are not as familiar as the water management district with minimum flows and levels. So when you say, Commissioner, that in the past MFLs have really not stopped projects or been a hindrance to projects, I think that there just has not been as good an understanding at the department of what those MFLs are and what they mean. In this situation, it's really incumbent on the Suwannee River Water Management District to try to provide that guidance to the department, because if this mine is going to impact prevention or recovery of those MFLs, then that means that it'll be either the environment will suffer as a result of that, or consumptive use permittees will have to compensate for the impacts of the mines. And so that's the issue that we're facing here today with the MFLs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So beyond, we're talking about, again, some deficiencies that the applicant has exposed. One of the other things is, besides showing compliance with the existing MFLs and recovery plans, there is a North Florida Regional Water Supply Plan that they make no mention of. And quite honestly, it's quite surprising to us when we find that these deficiencies actually existed in what they had moved forward. So the MFL, is the MFL program, if you will, is a very important environmental permitting program associated with water supply and also ecological issues. But one of the other things that you've got to get water right for is with regard to nutrients. And the other major environmental protection program administered by the Department of Environmental Protection is involved with meeting water quality standards. And those water bodies that do not achieve their appropriate water quality standards have been identified, or will be, or have been identified by the state as being impaired. And typically those impairments are associated with things like nutrients, chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, and bacteria. When a water body is deemed impaired, and there's a whole list of requirements that you must show before you can deem a water body impaired for water quality. The important thing is to recognize that upon definition or identification of a water body as being impaired, it kicks into play a series of programs that first begin with the total maximum daily load, and that's the TMDL acronym. And basically what TMDL is, it identifies the appropriate rate of supply of nutrient or whatever the pollutant may be to a water body to ensure that the water quality standards are achieved. So in a case where, in this case, for example, in the Santa Fe River Basin, there are two specific water bodies that have been deemed impaired back in 2008. And they were deemed impaired because of their lack of compliance with existing dissolved oxygen standards. Now, why that's important is those organisms that live in the river require specific amounts of dissolved oxygen, and when those levels are not met, that again kicks into the definition of an impaired water body and the need to develop a total maximum daily load, and which is again is the diet, if you will, for the nutrient or whatever pollutant may be involved. The BMAP, the Basin Management Action Plan, is the next step that kicks in, having had established what that TMDL is. And the Basin Management Action Plan basically is the bringing together of all the parties that are responsible for delivery of nutrients or whatever the pollutant may be to that water body of concern. And then the Basin Management Action Plan also, the product of that should be an allocation of whatever load reduction may be necessary to achieve the water quality standard across all those people or entities that are responsible for delivering the nutrients. There's a BMAP that has been established for the lower Santa Fe River. One of the problems is with this whole program, it takes many, many years to get to the point where you're actually improving things. And so, if you're ignoring those, it makes the problem even worse. And again, in a similar fashion to what we saw with the minimum flows and levels, there is no recognition of the importance of achieving the water quality standards upon completion of their project. So those levels have been established, for the lower Santa Fe River and for the New River, both in terms of nitrogen concentrations and phosphorus. Again, what's going to be expected of the applicant when they get around to it is to demonstrate that they will not cause or contribute to an existing impairment. And that's a very strict standard that needs to be met. And so, again, they haven't talked about how they may affect in their whole process of changing the environment and doing all the aspects of mining, how it may or may not affect the water supply, the getting the water right and getting the nutrients right is something that remains to be seen. So again, quite an important deficiency, if you will, before they can get their permits. So, Tom?
More of the same negative, I'm afraid. It's good seeing you after all these years.
Yep.
The wetland concerns are, once I got into it, I started seeing that there's a total absence of data, and there's some major things that are wrong with the way they're looking at it. For one thing, the whole mining area, I'm going to focus mainly on this area right here. This will be mined, and the water enters through a gap from the new river and then flows across this wetland of very high importance and back into the river. So I'm going to focus on my concerns for this whole area here. There are concerns elsewhere, but I wanted to focus on this. So the jurisdictional wetlands are in this upper area. The whole project is in a major area of wetland concern. Now, there are a number of documents. The environmental resource permit has been in various versions. This is from 2019, and in that case, here's the river. Here's kind of an upland, and the water. Again, this is one of those things, they only like looking on their own property. They don't like looking to see what the impact is adjacent or several miles away. And so the water is coming from the river mysteriously across this land. And then they wanted to build a stream, a diked stream, mine these two areas, and then put it back. So that was the first plan. The second plan, which came out on, that was 219, 319, it's now changed where they want to build a dike. Here's the river. Here's where the water's supposed to come in. Cut it off. And then they're going to mine this area. So what we're losing is the ability of that floodplain to operate as a filtration device, to take up sediment, to take up nutrients, to act as a wildlife passage, which is something we haven't even begun to look at yet. Okay, so we have this disconnect of the river from the floodplain. And how, it's just not clear from 325, it's totally disconnected again. So I'm not sure, and this is the area to be mined. And so what I'm concerned with is you're going to dike areas off, then you're going to reconnect them afterwards, but how much of that sand clay mixture is going to go down the stream? How's it going to be affecting the entire river system? If you do not get this right, not only you're creating different kinds of water bodies, but you have the potential for increasing erosion across the land. And I want to point out a few things. So pre-land use, this area to be mined was a bottomland hardwood forest. They cut it. And so the post-mining is, here's where that, this is from the 219. This is where that stream was going to go. What it's going to be now, I have no earthly idea. I will make a point about these lakes. We have studied lakes in the phosphate country that are from zero, just created, up into the age of 40, 50 years. They never change. What they are on day one is what they're going to remain forever. So if you don't get it right, they're going to look extremely bad with lots of bad algal problems. So, again, we're coming back to what to do about this area, but then there are a number of parcels as part of their overall reclamation, and they're proposing to come up with an acre-for-acre, type-for-type reclamation of wetlands and floodplains, and a foot-for-foot restoration of streams. The latter is of extreme importance because they're not going to do anything except just let the water run. And having worked in the phosphate country of Central Florida, there are a whole variety of engineering practices that have been done to try to put that stream back so that it's functional. Here, when you read their documents, it's very simple. You're going to let the water run and kind of form its own channel and find its own way across the floodplain into the river. That is, as I'll show you from some deposition, that to me is a call for disaster. Okay, I pulled out one, bear. And with bear, we've got a known history of not being able to census them very well. They don't like donuts in the wild. And so we're always underestimating bear populations. But if you look at this, I like how they have it. This is an occasional areas for bears to come in versus common. And I'm not sure the distinction between occasional and common, maybe pre and post hunting. Okay, these are from some of the streams that they have looking at the floodplain. And the one thing that hit me was the same thing that we had faced. I lived in Gainesville for 30 years. And the one thing that we faced in my backyard off of on Leith Avenue was a lot of deposition coming down the creek, sand being deposited on the Hogtown floodplain. Well, this looks to me like the Hogtown floodplain to me. So there has been a lot of sediment coming down the river and from the feeder streams coming in to the property and depositing sand. Okay, now what happens if we change the hydrology? What happens if you change the lay of the land? You're going to get streams cutting down to try to make new channels. So being a biologist, I had to throw in some biology, and there are two species that are of concern. One is the Swanee moccasin shell. It disappeared greater than 20 years ago from the river. And so this is a species that is endemic to this river basin. In other words, it's found nowhere else. They like acidic, tannic-colored waters where they meet spring waters. So a very particular habitat. And the one thing about the New River, and Commissioner Hutchinson, when you talk about the New versus the Santa Fe, you got a major color difference when those two things hit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So what happens if you change, where's that color coming from? It's coming from these swamps that are the floodplain. And so it slowly leaches out, and if you change the water coming in, you're going to change the color. What's color do? Color affects oxygen, because the more colored the system, the less oxygen. It also affects the ability of photosynthesis, so you don't have a lot of algae if there's a lot of color. So if you get rid of the color, all of a sudden any excess nitrogen and phosphorus coming off this land is suddenly going to be available for use. I hate to be the gloom spreader, but that's what's likely to happen. Last reported in 1996. This species could be, we look at the New River as being a refugium in which you could reintroduce it if it's done correctly. But it does not do well if there's any kind of a catastrophic change. The second species is a much wider distributed species, the oval pigtail. I love these names. I don't know where they come up with it. It's like Sam's New River, which I think is really quite good. But this is a wider spread species. It's endemic to the southeast. International organizations, as well as the Fish and Game, say that it's endangered. New River is considered critical habitat by the state of Florida. And if you look, one of my students years ago at UF was studying the clams in this river, and it has the most amazing populations of the exotic clam corbicula. And it's a whole reef of clams right where it joins the Santa Fe. So they're feeding on material that's coming down, and these clams are going to be very, very sensitive to any changes in the water itself. Now, in terms of a regionally significant mitigation project, there are three corridors that we want to focus on: 5 Mile Creek, New River Corridor, and Richard Creek Corridor. And we'll do these one at a time. In looking at their plans for the 5 miles of the New River that is within their project area, they only have one sampling station proposed for the river. And again, we have to know what's going on above and below the mine site. We lack a lot of historical data, but by gosh, we better have a lot of good data. They are proposing to remove berms, which is going to allow water to flow from the land into the floodplain and into the creek directly. Along the Richard Creek corridor, for example, the northern part of it has flow all the time. The southern portion of it does not. And if you look at their delineations, there's almost no upland that's associated with these creeks. So that comes from the adjacent property. Okay? And so it's an additive process, as you well know, and having dealt with these kind of issues before, that we have to be extremely concerned about having sufficient land around the water body to protect it and to let it function. This one is even worse. 5 Mile Creek, even though it's small, you have a section up here. They don't own this land, but they own this land down here. So somehow we've got to have the water get across this land, no plans, and they're going to remove a berm. There's no upland buffer, and it says you just let them connect. And somebody mentioned Odom earlier, and Odom was very much into letting systems self-organize. That's fine, but we can't do it here. You can't let one just kind of connect to the other and let it go on. So the general concerns are, for one thing, there's going to be lots and lots of barbed wire out there, which is going to hinder the ability of the New River Corridor to act for wildlife removal. Berm removal may increase sedimentation. There's only one monitoring site on the New River. And then we have each wetland, many of these wetlands are going to be surrounded by an 18-inch berm, has been proposed to isolate them from the upland. That's not the intention here. These wetlands are extremely important for amphibians, reptiles, anything, and this is a major concern for conservation in this area. Little or no upland buffer, and no active restoration. Let the system just reorganize itself. The overall concerns is a loss of connectivity with the river, a loss of sediment trapping by the floodplain, which is going to go downstream, a reproductive failure of selective tree species because of altered hydrology, a reduction in the colored level in the New River, which will increase light for phytoplankton and therefore getting blooms. So I didn't bring the best of news, but I had to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you. So Commissioner Cornell,
Thank you.
do you want to go ahead and summarize?
This is a presentation that, as you can see, was very technical, and it was really designed to help the regulatory agencies who we've set up meetings with to discuss these issues with them. Commissioner Byerly, you asked whether there were any standards on there. There are standards in the rules and the regulations that each of the agencies have to follow. But in order to be able to properly address those standards, the agency folks don't have all the information, and if they're not being told this by the applicant, then our job, as we see it, is to make sure that the agency is aware of these deficiencies so that they ask the correct questions and they do their job in terms of reviewing the permits that are going to be required for this project. If you have any questions, the group would be happy to answer them. I would be happy to answer them, but that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Great presentation. Commissioner Cornell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and your team. This is, I think, exactly what we needed at the time that we are. I guess I've got a couple of questions. When you've communicated with the agencies, I presume your experts, yourself, what's been their response?
They've taken a lot of notes and asked a lot of questions, and they tell us that these are issues definitely that they will need to have the applicant address. There isn't, to be honest with you, there isn't any meeting that we've attended where the agency said, "Oh my God, how did this situation occur?" They're much more professional and how they deal with it, but they are very interested in the information that we gave them, and they took copious notes.
Well, it would seem like, after tonight now, this is all public information. It's available to anyone, and I guess it would be interesting to know, have you had an opportunity, or has our staff had an opportunity to communicate some of these deficiencies or all of these deficiencies to Bradford and Union County, and maybe some of the municipalities that are affected?
So, Mr. Chair, some of these agencies, county staff and our office have tried to set up these meetings. We have set up meetings with Swanee River. We have a meeting this week with the Department of Environmental Protection, the FWC, and we have Bradford County has hired outside consultants to act as their reviewers of the application to Bradford County for a special use permit, which is the only permit they need from Bradford County. And we're expecting that report soon. We have communicated with both county staff, Bradford County staff, and with the with the applicant's consultant that we would very much like to sit down and talk to them about this. But currently, our understanding is that the consultant has been instructed not to meet with us.
And that consultant hasn't yet issued their report to Bradford County.
As far as I know, that report is not yet issued, but it is imminent.
Okay, well, now they have additional information, so hopefully, I mean, I think, Commissioners, I'd love to hear, obviously, from the public and your comments, but I think at a very minimum, we should be asking our staff to try to summarize this information as far as some of the deficiencies and communicating it in writing, along with all of this data to all of the affected parties so that everyone can kind of weigh in, and if they have questions, can lean in. And to the extent that our staff is invited to attend these public meetings, they could, provide, I would certainly be in favor of them providing, us providing our time for them to go and make presentations and begin to inform the public, not just the public of the municipality or the county that they represent, but all the surrounding areas that this mine affects. It's not one of those things where it affects Worthington Springs or Alachua County or Bradford or Union. It affects everything. It affects the whole region. To the extent I've talked to a number of state and representatives and senators, and they are very focused on water and water quality and springs restoration, and I think they would be interested in hearing about a lot of this information. And so I think we have the beginnings of a great information about what the impacts to not just the county or the city, but the state and the springs that we should begin to share as widely and as quickly as possible. That would be my thoughts. And so I'll hear from y'all, hear from the public, and then we'll see if we can get a motion to that effect.
Mike?
Just one question. Very thorough presentation. Thank you. We're all roughly familiar with the various state agencies and the role that they play. You mentioned a federal permit. Mm-hmm. What role will the federal government play? What part of this will they be involved in? What approval do they have to give?
So the federal government will be involved with any permits to dredge and fill navigable waters or waters of the United States. And so there are waters in here and wetlands that would fall within federal jurisdiction that they're looking to mine, and they would need a federal dredge and fill permit in order to mine it, just as they would need a state environmental resource permit to mine them.
Their role is not water quality or habitat. Their role is preservation of navigation.
No, their role is they look at the environmental impacts. They have similar standards to the state. They're different. With regards to water quality, the state permit acts as the certification of compliance with state water quality standards. So they do not directly look at water quality issues, but they will look at things like wildlife, and they will have federal agencies such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will comment and provide comment to them. EPA will provide comment to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they will look at environmental impacts, wetland impacts, impacts to endangered and threatened species. They will look to things like alteration of rivers and river habitats and things of that nature. They won't look at things like water quantity, consumptive use, and I mentioned the water quality is going to if you get the state permit, then that's a certification of compliance with water quality.
Okay, so, but they do have to. The federal government does. This is what EPA.
It's the Army Corps of Engineers is the one that issues the permit. EPA will be a commenting agency along with the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, so the Corps actually issues the permit.
They will, and the Army Corps has a much more intense cumulative impact analysis than the state does. And so the Army Corps, and I know that there are other mines that have been discussed, as well as expansion of those mines, and so the Army Corps may look at all of those other projects, both existing and maybe projected future projects, and looking at this particular project.
So the Army Corps of Engineers has a rich history in Florida, as you're aware, I'm sure, and you may not be able to answer this question, but to your knowledge, have they ever denied a permit in the state of Florida?
I do not recall that they've ever denied a permit for a phosphate mine, but they have impacted how the mine was developed in terms of what could be mined or what couldn't be mined and what needed to be preserved or not preserved. They also had conducted a area-wide environmental impact study in the Central Florida phosphate region, where they looked at cumulative impacts from several mines in that area. I don't believe that study encompassed this area, though. Thank you.
Commissioner Wheeler.
I have a question for you, gentlemen. Are you alarmed by what you have seen? Are you alarmed? Okay, do you think the consultants that they would bring on board, that this group would bring on, would see what you see and either ignore it or, I mean, you all work with professionals, right, in the field?
You'll have to speak into the microphone.
Since I'm the one that was openly critical, maybe I should answer that. I was alarmed. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are industry standards for these things. And the development of a phosphate mine, the developer starts years, in some cases decades, before they actually file for a permit, monitoring water, putting in stream and groundwater gauges. And by the time the ERP permit is developed, in my experience, the amount of information is just overwhelming. And I mean, it's the absolute opposite of what we have here. And that did alarm me, yes, ma'am.
Well, who will have the final say as to whether this is approved or not? Is it a combination of all the permits gathering, or who is there one final stamp that gets put?
Local, state, and federal, they have to get all three.
Okay.
You have to obtain the approval of probably 6 or 7 federal, state, and local agencies.
So it's not up just to the Bradford County Commission at this point?
That's only one small decision. They still would need their state environmental resource permit, MPDS permit. They would need a consumptive use permit. They would need the federal permit, and there may be, like I said, 2 or 3 other slightly less significant permits that they would need.
Well, one more question. I think I'm just so glad that you guys are our team. That's all. You give me great confidence, all of you. I'm just wondering how far you go with us with this. How, you know,
we go as far as you want us to go on this thing.
Okay. You're our guys. Okay.
That's right.
All right, before we go to the public, I'm just going to make a couple comments. One is that my first experience with phosphate mining was drifting down the Suwannee River neck deep past Swift Creek, where the outfall from the phosphate mine up in Hamilton County comes into the Suwannee River. And it was a warm summer day, and after the Swift Creek was pouring in a very short order, the water felt very slimy. And then another half hour down the river, critters were starting to bite us in the water. Some little, I don't know what they would be, but they were obviously happy with the phosphorus in there, and we had to get out of the water, and we grabbed a water sample. And at the time I had friends at the Center for Wetlands, and they analyzed it, and sure enough it was way high in phosphorus. And that was just a little education I got as a hippie floating down the Suwannee River way back in the day. I'm very familiar with the confluence of the New River and the Santa Fe, because when I was with the Alachua Conservation Trust, we bought the property on the south side of the river. It's now Santa Fe River Preserve. It's owned by Alachua Conservation Trust. It was part of GRU's property that they acquired when they were going to run a coal train up from their Deer Haven plant up to hook into the Norfolk Southern line. And when we got it, we spent a lot of time messing around in the river, and the Santa Fe is absolutely gorgeous up there. It's my go-to place when I want to sit neck deep in beautiful water. And the idea that it would be destroyed in the way the upper Suwannee was is heartbreaking. When ACT had I keep a little native fish aquarium, and I call it my spa because I catch fish, put them in there, watch them for a month, and then I take them back to where they came from. But when ACT's fisheries biologist, who's on the board, named Howard Jelks, who works for the USGS, he could pick any spot in Alachua County to take a bunch of people on a field trip about native fish. He picked that spot. He said that is where we will find, that's the healthiest river, where we will find more cool stuff. And so there were little kids up there and big kids like me, and we were netting and getting all these fish and putting them in aquariums and looking at them, and we were catching shiners and darters and mad toms, and we had amphumas, and we had different kinds of mussels, and there was a mussel and clam guy there too talking to us about them. And then he said, okay, back out, and he got in with an electroshocking device, which doesn't kill the fish, put a net downstream, got in there, and dozens of more critters that we had no idea were in there came up. We looked at them, put them back as well. The point is, this is not just any old river. This is an incredible gem of a place. And but for a half a dozen families whose greed shows that they care little or nothing for the environment, know nothing about that place or care for that place, we are all at risk of losing this very special place. And Alachua County decided that we were going to spend what it takes to see what we could do to either completely make it go away, or if they end up with some sort of permits, to make sure that those permits do the maximum that we can imagine in protecting the river. Tonight was really this team showing us what we're getting for our money, what we're getting for your money. And I'm very pleased both with the breadth of their knowledge and the depth of their observations. And what we got was a summary, because what they've done is much more than just what we're hearing tonight. And this is it's a real battle, and we're doing it now in a way that is cooperative, willing to be collaborative. We're letting them see our information. We want them to do the best job possible. And I'm actually kind of stunned at what a poor job the applicants are doing, having been involved in this now for several years. So they're not taking it seriously, what the needs of the river are, and they're not taking it seriously in terms of what ought to be their responsibilities. So I'm very pleased. I'm angry as hell that we even have to be dealing with this, but I'm very pleased with the team that we've assembled and the work that they've done and will continue to work. And I don't think this county is going to be deterred by anything that they can come up with. We will continue to work with them and then work against them as necessary. So with that, Commissioner Cornell.
Well, before we get to the public, I would ask staff from their perspective. We've gotten this information. Is what I laid out, communicating this information in a summary format and then with the details behind it, is I guess I would ask what your recommendation is, Madam Manager, with regards to the different stakeholders. Is that something that you think we can do, we should do at this point? Should we just send them the presentation, or are you looking for direction from us?
Sure, I think at this point we're looking for direction from you if you want to do additional stakeholder meetings, or how you want to relay this information.
You see any problem from staff's perspective or the attorney's perspective from our Environmental Protection Department staff summarizing some of these deficiencies, creating a presentation, and then sending it to the different stakeholders?
I'm looking at the attorneys.
So Mr. Chair, I think the question with that is whether we have the capacity to do that, and that was going to be on staff. I think that it's important that the message get out there. We are in the influence stage of our process here, and we will be in the coalition building phase at some point. And I think both of those are in the same path. And I'll tell you, with the presentation, when you talk about summary, I think it's important that the layperson have talking points. And this was very in-depth, and this was clearly a technical presentation that was aimed at the regulatory agencies, but something higher level that is, the 5 big problems, the 5 big issues that people can pull out, and we can all be talking about the same thing, is helpful, I believe, to getting a consistent message and making certain that we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and so I agree with that. And I think that, earlier today on our consent agenda, the legislature gave us the ability years back to have meetings outside of our district and or for folks to come visit our district. And so, what I'm thinking is that we ask our EPD staff to develop a short presentation with talking points about the deficiencies and the potential risks, that we have our experts check it to make sure it's factually correct, and that we send it to Union County, Bradford County, the different cities. We give them this more thorough presentation, which for y'all is a summary, but for them may not be. We give them that information, and then we invite them to a joint meeting to discuss any and all of it if they'd like, so that we are at least on the record of providing the information and wanting to communicate information about our concerns, about the everything that Commissioner Hutchinson spoke about down history lane, but mostly about the future, and our resources that the information that we provided at the expense of the Alachua County taxpayers. So that's kind of what I'm gelling, and I'll hear from my colleagues, and then I'll try to draft something up while people are talking.
And then we're going to the public.
One more question I should have asked about time frame. Can someone speak to, this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? This could potentially drag on for years. They could go away for 5 years and come back. If everything goes stunningly well, how soon could they have for them, how soon could they have a permit?
So I think they have decided, just looking at through our public record request and talking to various agency members, that Bradford County is their critical path, and they're trying to get that permit issued first, along with any conditions that the county may place on that. And I would guess that their next step would be then to apply for the state environmental resource permit, formally apply for it. They've been submitting things to the state since early 2017, and then to the Water Management District and to the Army Corps. And we'll have a better idea when we meet with the Department of Environmental Protection later this week to see how many questions they've had. The documents that we've seen show that they still have a lot of unanswered questions, and this could be a process that could move as quickly as 6 months if in fact the agencies are satisfied with the information. The Army Corps won't move as quickly as 6 months. It'll take a longer period of time.
Well, that's a part of it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. The Army Corps is just because of their workload and other things they're working on. It's just going to be a much slower process, or it could be a process that takes a few years for them to work their way through. It's hard to know until we have a better idea what are the outstanding issues that they see.
at the soonest 1 to 2 years before some decision is made. Again, it could drag on for a long, long time if you decide to just wait.
I would think at least 1 year, given the Army Corps' involvement in this situation, and maybe longer, and most certainly could be longer.
And the deficiencies in the information they've presented, I mean, there's no downside to them providing as little information as they have to, right? If they drag their feet, and just, okay, ask us and we'll give it to you, but we're not going to proffer anything unless they're required to. Is that sort of what's happening here?
That's exactly right. When you represent permit applicants, like I have represented permit applicants, it's you typically will answer their questions. If they don't happen to ask a question, you don't volunteer that information, and then if they eventually ask that question, then you go ahead and prepare a report or a study to do that. But you don't necessarily go out of your way to come up with questions that you want then to answer regarding the situation.
And they couldn't start until all the permits are completed.
Correct.
I have a question for Commissioner Cornell. We're going to the North Florida Regional Planning. Could you present something there? You're part of that water committee as well. Could you say something then to the group, which would include some of these counties that would be affected by water bodies?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that they would be an interested party that our staff would send this information to, and then that body would need to act on that information.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Manager.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would suggest with sending out this information that we put that with a cover letter from the chair, providing some background information in that letter as well as a link, the link to this meeting, because I think it's helpful to actually watch this. The presentation, the reason we brought them here is not necessarily self-explanatory when you provide it. Also, we could certainly offer our assistance, our staff's assistance, and even our experts and assistance as well, particularly those small cities who don't have those type of resources available to them.
All right, well, thank you all very much. So what we're going to do is take public comment. We don't have a motion on the floor, so we're going to give everybody who wants to speak 3 minutes. But the most useful thing for us would be those things that you think would be useful for us, or particularly our experts, to answer or ask. I know the people, many of the people in the room, and there's strong feelings against the phosphate mine, but at this point, the useful thing is going to be how can we do a better job of making sure it goes away or at least operates in a better situation. So with that, I'll open the floor, public comments. You got 3 minutes, and we've got a light system to help you time yourself, and don't all rush up here at once. Good evening.
Paul Still again, Bradford County. We've been looking at this project from the very beginning, and some of you may know I was on the other side for a period of time. So I had to look very hard at this project. I've spent a lot of time on it. Came up with the same sort of conclusions that your expert came up with. But if I were to go in and challenge this permit pro se, which is the way I do these, my credentials as a plant pathologist holds no weight. So I really want to thank you for bringing these experts on who do have that weight. But having said that, I think their presentations could be sharpened significantly if they worked with us, the people on the ground who have the on-ground experience, have gone through these permits or their application materials, both for the county and the various stages. This has been a very fluid application process, so there's been major changes as we've gone through this. So we really don't know until they do the final application to DEP what we're dealing with. So at this point, the thing that I think is real important to focus on is the Bradford County permit. Bradford County has a very strong element in their land development regulations. It simply says mining of, basically paraphrasing it, mining of wetlands is prohibited if you cannot prove by substantial scientific evidence that that wetland can be restored. It's not reclaimed, it's restored. This is extremely strong language. Unfortunately, the Bradford County Commissioners totally disregarded that language when they permitted the Comores mining operation. So it's going to be very important to have really strong witnesses to go in when this comes before the Bradford County Commission to make the argument that what they've demonstrated so far in no way meets the ability to restore wetlands. And part of the problem is because of the material that they're putting back, there's no way to kind of restore the geology under those wetlands. And I think we kind of, it wasn't emphasized enough that they're planning to mine significant wetlands in Bradford County. And I'm speaking only of Bradford County because that's the only part that I've really looked at in depth. And so providing a mechanism for us to engage either with your environmental staff, I think would be very helpful going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners and team. My name is Carol Mosley, and I'm a Bradford County resident from the tiny town of Graham. And I have some of the most delicious water you would ever want to taste. And I'm situated in between pockets of sulfur and iron. So my little pocket is really precious to me. As a Bradford County resident, I just want to say thank you to Alachua's commitment to scrutiny of the HPS mining plans. Unfortunately, my own county has demonstrated a lack of scrutiny and an inability to understand the terms competent and substantial evidence. This leaves many of us despondent, so thanks for feeding our hope that someone will be performing the necessary due diligence. Even more disheartening than the lack of scrutiny is what I believe to be a clear demonstration of bias on the part of some of the commissioners themselves and staff. We local residents from Bradford and Union County surely try to bring the details into the sunshine, despite resistance in obtaining documents requested and answers sought. We've tried to help guide the county commissioners to a fair and open process, but we're seen as a bother rather than valuable assets in helping them perform their required due diligence. So allow me to offer my services of research and context over the 4 years plus, almost 4 years that I've been involved in this process. The Center for Biodiversity is a great ally for you all, who is very, very informed. I've been keeping them apprised of all documents. They know what's going on, and they are involved with endangered species. So they are certainly our allies in that. We'll get a Comores packet to you, too, by the way. Thank you for taking that, looking at that. Article 5.3, I believe, of our comprehensive plan says that the county must coordinate with neighboring counties. I keep bringing that up, and they just blow me off on that one. And I think somebody ought to look into the flocculent and stabilizing called RMAZ, ARRMAZ. It's the chemical that they intend to use as a flocculant, and I believe also in adding to the soil to try to create the type of perk that we need to have. And it could be very expensive. One of the Schroeder, the hydrologist for on-site environmental consulting, the company who is doing the evaluation right now, brought up the point that there was no evaluation of the cost of this, and the response from HPS was kind of like, yeah, thank you very much, but that's none of your business. So, of course, he has concerns that if it gets over costly, that they'll file bankruptcy and leave the mess to us. So, again, thank you all very, very much for getting involved here, and may your holidays be merry and bright and filled with love and light. Thank you.
Good evening.
My name is Cindy North. I'm with a group called CAPM, Citizens Against Phosphate Mining from Lake Butler. We've been organized for about 5 years, and I've been to many meetings, and the last one in Bradford County where they gave the special permit, people don't realize that is not phosphate in that area by the airport, that the 800 acres that they want to mine, that is titanium, and they have been doing that in Stark for quite a while. That area will affect Crystal Lake, and I don't know if people realize the discharge that Chamorros puts out now. If you go to New River right now, that river, as a rule, stays fairly full because of the discharge. The lakes in Keystone, Brooklyn Lake, is taking that water right now, and it's not a good thing. And we appreciate all the help you've given us. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Rubin. I live in High Springs. I live on the Santa Fe River. And, you know, I was at a meeting last night in Fort White about another problem that the Santa Fe River is encountering. And I was in Bradford County 2 months ago for the Comores meeting that they had. And I just want to say, if there's anything that the board can do, this group can do, to enlighten the Bradford County Commission. They do need enlightenment. That's all I have. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Additional public comments? Yes, sir.
David Moritz. Well, I guess I'm not going to say something useful, but what I do want to say is I want to thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Board, for doing what you have been doing to protect our lovely Santa Fe River. We love our river. We want it to stay healthy for many, many, many years to come, and we think that this is a good step in that direction, getting that done. I'd also like to advise you to take perhaps a closer look at what's coming down the New River already. There are corporations that are, practicing already and polluting that river, and, who's to know what else is coming down? But I think that may be something else that we can add to the mix. I was at this morning's meeting with the Water Management District, and they really didn't give us, a good, solid idea of where they're going with the MFLs. But it didn't look like they're turning for the worst there as well. I think we need to keep pushing on them as well. It's just, there's so many things to ask you to do at this point in time. But thank you very much for doing what you are doing.
Yes, sir.
Long line of thank yous, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for this presentation. 2 suggestions. David Morris just spoke. I know he didn't overlook it, but we're all trying to give our river a voice with the David, what's the name? What? Safe bore. I can't do contractions. Essentially, it gives it the same voice as this great corporation might have. And so you can't do things to the river any more than you can do them to a private corporation. Safe bore is very important and may help. It gives the river actually legal rights, and it'll be back to you once we get it going. And the other thing I might suggest is, in all your good suggestions tonight, invite those folks here. Feed them. Have a special meeting with these great experts and bring them to Alachua County, because we're the real center of North Florida. And you're the only force in North Florida that has the money and the people and the interest that can bring it all together. And let's just treat them like they want to know. Just have a special meeting. We should do that right here, and give them lunch, and we'll all watch, and all those commissioners will come down and tell us how they feel about it, and maybe you'll change some minds about what we've heard about some of the viewpoints. I think it'd be good to have a special meeting. I think Ken started on that train, and that would be a great answer. Thanks for what you've done here.
Additional public comment. All right, back to the board. One thing I want to mention that we've also done is create a public-facing website. Whenever we do our frequent public records requests of the agencies and the applicant and so forth, we take that information and we put it on a website, because we know how hard and sometimes expensive it is to get those public records, and the agencies weren't making them easily available. So we've got umpteen numbers of gigabytes of information for anybody that wants to peruse the information that the agencies are getting. Commissioner Cornell.
Okay, I'll try a motion, and it's obviously can be added to or modified based on the will of the board. So I would move that staff prepare a chair letter to Bradford and Union counties and the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council with a link to tonight's presentation. Attached to this letter, and the affected municipalities, which would include Bronson, Lake Butler, Worthington Springs, and whoever else staff determines is affected. Brooker. Whoever's affected, which would include everyone affected. I mean, I think High Springs should be, yeah. This letter should include, 1, staff prepared a summarized presentation of both the deficiencies of the existing mining application and related risks associated with this project. 2, a copy of tonight's presentation. 3, an invitation for a joint meeting with each of the governmental bodies to be hosted by us. And then 4 was a kind of a catch-all. Any additional factual information that is relevant to this issue, which may be obtained through additional meetings with the various stakeholders. Kind of a catch-all. That would be part 1. Part 2 would be that staff make themselves available to any citizens that have additional information they could provide, so that they could get that information to our experts. That's the motion.
Got a motion and a second. Questions about the motion? You need to.
I need to firm up the second piece.
The chair letter that included an offer of our assistance.
I'm sorry, offer, well, not assistance, offer for a joint meeting so we could give them the information that we have.
Okay.
Factual information, not financial assistance, but factual information that we have.
Well, Right, I had suggested offering our assistance as far as our own staff, or if you wanted to offer any of our experts assistance.
Yeah, so to the extent they want that and we have a joint meeting, I think that would be determined at that joint meeting. Because then we could kind of refine what assistance they need.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Anybody need to comment specifically to this motion?
And I want to thank not just the room that's full tonight, but the folks that couldn't be here tonight. Been a lot of people involved to get us to where we are right now. And as Mike said, there may be different commissioners that are deciding ultimately what to do, because this is a marathon. And I think we're setting the foundation for what we need to do, so thank you.
All right, back to the board. All in favor signify with aye. All opposed. I want to thank all you gentlemen for all the work you're doing and will continue to do for us. And I couldn't be prouder of Alachua County for standing up for the Santa Fe River, our gem. So thank you all very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break.